Welcome to Innovation Brief by IdeaScale, where we turn your work team into innovators.
Today we're tackling company culture, which, it's one of those things that everyone talks about, but it can feel kind of vague and intangible sometimes.
I totally agree.
But we're going to try to break it down and get super practical today.
Yeah, let's make it actionable.
So we're using this IdeaScale blog post as our guide. And one stat that immediately jumps out is that a whopping 50% of employees, get this, feel held back by a lack of transparency at work.
Wow, that's a huge number.
Yeah, it's kind of alarming when you think about it.
It is. It really highlights the importance of building a culture of trust and open communication.
Yeah.
Where people feel like they're in the loop and their opinions matter.
Right, exactly. And the IdeaScale post really emphasizes that. They start off by saying that we need to define our objectives when it comes to company culture. So I'm curious, what does that actually look like in a real-world setting?
Well, it's about getting very specific. Instead of just saying, we want a great culture, companies need to ask themselves some tough questions, like, what are the behaviors and values that are absolutely essential? What tangible outcomes are we hoping our culture will drive?
So it's not enough to just have a general feel-good vibe.
Right, exactly. And maybe even more importantly, how are we going to measure success? And how will we hold people accountable?
Yeah, that accountability piece is crucial.
It is. For example, let's say one of your goals is to foster innovation.
Okay, yeah, that's a common one.
Right. How do you actually measure if your culture is truly fostering innovation? You need concrete ways to track progress and make adjustments along the way.
It's like setting KPIs for your company culture.
Exactly. You need to be able to see if your efforts are actually moving the needle.
And speaking of defining things, the blog post then talks about crafting culture statements. Those mission, vision, and value statements we see everywhere. But how do we make them more than just like words on a wall?
Well, involving your team in the process, either creating them from scratch or refining existing ones, can be incredibly powerful. When people feel like they've had a hand in shaping the culture, they're much more likely to embrace it.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's not just a top-down decree, it's something they've helped build.
Yeah, it becomes a shared understanding, and it goes beyond just the words themselves. It's about how those values are reflected in the day-to-day operations of the company.
Right, which leads perfectly into the next point that the IdeaScale post makes alignment.
Yeah.
You can't just have these company-wide values floating around in a vacuum.
Exactly. Those values need to filter down to every level of the organization.
So departmental and team objectives, individual goals, everything needs to be aligned with those core values.
Precisely. And this is so important because it ensures that the message resonates throughout the company. It's not just something the CEO talks about in annual meetings. It's woven into the fabric of everything you do.
It's a cohesive story, from the big picture to the smallest tasks.
Right. And it also gives you multiple levels of measurement and accountability.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Because then you can track how well those values are being lived out, not just at the company level, but within each team and even by individuals.
That's the idea. It creates this beautiful synergy where everyone's moving in the same direction.
Okay, so we've got our objectives defined, our values aligned. Now let's talk about open communication, which the IdeaScale post dresses is absolutely vital. But it can't just be about having more meetings, right?
Oh, definitely not. More meetings aren't always the answer. It's about fostering a culture of open dialogue. So think regular check-ins where everyone feels comfortable sharing their progress and challenges, or project updates that encourage collaboration and feedback from all team members.
Yeah, it's creating that environment where people feel safe to speak up, to share their ideas, and to, maybe even challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about the importance of one-on-ones, not just to discuss tasks, but to provide genuine support and have honest conversations about professional development.
And those anonymous surveys can be really helpful too, right?
For sure. And exit interviews. They can be incredibly valuable tools to uncover areas where communication might be breaking down or where there are, unspoken issues.
So it's about creating feedback loops.
Yes. And more importantly, showing that you're listening and you're actually willing to act on the feedback you receive.
It all comes back to trust, right?
It does. When people feel like they're being heard and their opinions matter, it builds a foundation of trust. And that trust, in turn, encourages even more open communication.
It's a positive cycle. So we've talked about open communication, but the IdeaScale post actually digs a little deeper into the concept of transparency. What makes transparency so vital and what happens when it's lacking?
Well, A lack of transparency, as we've touched on, can breed distrust and disengagement. And the Post mentions a Forbes study that found that, get this, 50% of employees feel held back by a lack of transparency at work.
Wow, that's a huge percentage.
It is. It really is. And it can have a ripple effect throughout the entire organization. It can stifle creativity, slow down decision-making, and even lead to, a decline in overall productivity.
And I think sometimes companies might underestimate the impact that a lack of transparency can have on morale.
Yeah, I think that's true. When people feel like they're being kept in the dark, it can lead to rumors and speculation, which can be really damaging to the overall culture.
Right, it creates this sense of uncertainty and anxiety, and it can make people feel like they're not really a valued part of the team.
Exactly. Whereas when there's transparency, it fosters a sense of ownership and responsibility.
People feel like they're part of something bigger.
Yes, and they're more likely to be engaged and committed to the company's success.
Now, speaking of success, the IdeaScale post goes on to talk about building an innovation culture. What does that actually look like in practice? Because I think sometimes that term can get thrown around without a lot of substance behind it.
Yeah, it definitely can. An innovation culture is about more than just, brainstorming new products or services. It's about creating an environment where people feel empowered to challenge the status quo, where they feel comfortable taking risks and, even sharing their wildest ideas.
It's about creating that psychological safety, that space where people feel like it's okay to make mistakes, to experiment, to maybe even fail sometimes.
Exactly. It's about embracing failure as a learning opportunity. And that can be a big shift for some companies.
It can, especially those that are used to, a more traditional top-down hierarchy where mistakes are seen as, something to be avoided at all costs.
Right, right. But the IdeaScale post makes it clear that building an innovation culture requires a conscious effort. It starts with strong leadership buy-in. Leaders need to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. They need to actively encourage experimentation, celebrate those learning moments, and reward creative problem solving.
It's about setting the tone from the top down, right? Making it clear that everyone is an innovator, not just a select few.
Exactly. It's about empowering everyone to contribute their ideas and perspectives.
And that brings us to the next point, which is attracting the right people to contribute to this amazing culture you're building. The post talks about hiring for culture fit and culture add. What's the difference? And why is it so important?
That's a great question. While culture fit often focuses on finding people who, blend seamlessly into the existing culture, culture add is about seeking individuals who bring fresh perspectives, who bring diverse experiences, and who might even, shake things up a bit.
It's not just about maintaining the status quo. It's about actively seeking out people who can challenge your assumptions, who can help you evolve.
Precisely. It's about nurturing that diversity of thought, which is essential for truly groundbreaking innovation.
Okay, so we've talked about open communication, but the IdeaScale post, like I said, takes it a step further and really emphasizes transparency as a key ingredient in a thriving company culture. Why is transparency so vital, and what are the potential consequences if it's lacking?
Well, as we've touched on, a lack of transparency can breed distrust and disengagement. And the post highlights some interesting stats here. For example, the Harvard Business Review found that a huge 70% of workers, 70%, feel more engaged when senior management communicates openly.
That's a compelling number.
It really is, and it makes sense, right? When people feel like they're in the loop, they feel more connected to the company and its mission.
And they're more likely to trust the decisions that are being made.
Exactly. It's not just about sharing good news either. It's about being honest about the challenges the company is facing, being open about the decision-making process, even admitting when mistakes are made.
It's about vulnerability and authenticity.
Yes, it's about creating that culture where people feel safe to speak their minds without fear of reprisal.
Which brings us to another crucial element highlighted in the IdeaScale post, leading by example. This one seems so obvious, yet why do you think it's often overlooked by some leaders?
That is a great question. I think it often comes down to a disconnect between words and actions. It's easy to, talk about the importance of transparency and open communication, but it takes real commitment and self-awareness to actually embody those values in everything you do.
It's about walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Exactly. Actions speak louder than words, as they say. And the IdeaScale post actually uses a pretty powerful stat to illustrate this point.
Oh, tell me about it.
A 2022 study by the Global Culture Research Report found that a staggering 81% of employees who rated their work culture as poor had witnessed their managers allowing inappropriate behaviors to slide.
Wow, that's pretty damning.
It is. And on the flip side, 90% of employees in that same study said their managers played a vital role in shaping their team's microculture.
So it really does trickle down.
Mm-hmm.
The manager's behavior sets the tone for the entire team.
It absolutely does. Leading by example is not just a nice to have, it's a fundamental element of building a healthy, high-performing culture. And it all starts with self-awareness. Leaders need to honestly ask themselves, am I truly modeling the behaviors I want to see in others?
That's a great question for all of us to ask ourselves, regardless of our role in the company. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from defining objectives to leading by example. But there's one more piece of the puzzle that the IdeaScale post really emphasizes, and it's one that I think is often overlooked: praise and recognition. Why is recognizing your employees so important?
It's more crucial than a lot of people realize. And it goes beyond just celebrating those big wins or those major milestones. It's about acknowledging and appreciating the everyday efforts, the small acts of collaboration, the moments of creative problem solving. Those seemingly small gestures can make a huge difference.
So it's about creating a culture of appreciation where people feel genuinely valued for their contributions, big or small. How can companies actually put that into practice?
Well, the post suggests implementing a designated recognition program, which can be really helpful to formalize the process. But it also stresses the importance of day-to-day praise. Make it a habit to thank your team members for their hard work, acknowledge their ideas, even if they don't all get implemented, celebrate their successes.
It's those consistent actions that create a positive environment.
Exactly. And don't forget the power of public recognition. Sharing positive feedback in team meetings or company-wide announcements can be incredibly motivating. It not only boosts the morale of the person being recognized, but it inspires others to strive for excellence.
It creates the sense of shared success.
Yes. And it all ties back to that human need for belonging and purpose that we all crave in our work. When people feel valued and appreciated, they're more likely to be engaged, more productive, and more committed to the company's success. It's a win-win for everyone. It really is amazing how all of these elements, transparency, recognition, leadership, they all work together to create this environment where innovation can really flourish.
It's like they're all pieces of the same puzzle, right?
Exactly. And the IdeaScale blog post, it really drives home the point that creating this strong company culture, it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
Right. It's not like you can just check it off your to-do list and move on.
Definitely not. It requires constant evaluation, adaptation. As your organization evolves, your culture needs to evolve with it.
It's a living, breathing thing, basically.
It really is. I like to think of it like tending a garden. You need to regularly weed out the negative elements, nurture the positive ones, and adjust your approach as the seasons change.
That's a perfect analogy. So the IdeaScale post wraps up by underlining this really strong connection between a strong company culture and innovation. They even say, although it's a significant investment in time and resources, it builds the team required to drive innovation. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a spot-on statement. When you create a culture where people feel valued, supported, and empowered to take risks, you unlock this incredible creative potential.
It's like you're creating the fertile ground for those innovative ideas to sprout and grow.
Exactly. It's not just about having talented people. It's about giving them the space and the freedom to do their best work.
Because a company with a toxic culture, or even just a really stifling culture, they might have brilliant minds on their team, but those minds are going to be, held back. They're not going to be able to truly shine.
Exactly. Innovation needs room to breathe. It needs that psychological safety we talked about, that sense of trust and that freedom to experiment without the fear of being penalized for trying something new.
And that psychological safety, it stems directly from a healthy company culture, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's about fostering a sense of belonging, encouraging open communication, embracing both successes and failures as valuable learning experiences.
So when you create that kind of environment, innovation becomes less of a happy accident and more of a natural outcome. It becomes ingrained in the company's DNA.
Exactly. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about our listeners. We've covered a lot of ground today, but what are some actionable takeaways that they can actually implement in their own organizations, maybe even starting tomorrow?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
How do we take all this great information and turn it into real change?
Well, I think the first step is clarity. Define your objectives. What kind of culture do you want to create? What values are non-negotiable? And how will you actually measure your success?
So get really clear on that vision before you do anything else.
Right. And once you have that clear vision, get your team involved in crafting or refining your culture statements. Make sure it's a collaborative effort.
And remember, those statements, they can't just be words on a wall.
Oh, definitely not. They need to be reflected in your everyday actions, decisions, and interactions.
It's about walking the walk.
Yes, exactly. And don't underestimate the power of open communication and transparency. Create systems for feedback. Foster those safe spaces for dialogue, and be willing to tackle those tough issues head on. Don't shy away from them.
Address those elephants in the room.
Exactly.
And of course, we can't forget about leadership.
Oh, absolutely. Leading by example is crucial. Leaders need to embody those values they're championing. They need to hold themselves accountable for creating a positive and inclusive work environment.
It all starts at the top.
It really does. And finally, don't forget about praise and recognition. Celebrate those wins, big and small. Acknowledge those individual contributions and cultivate a culture of genuine appreciation.
It goes such a long way.
It really does. And remember, building a strong company culture, it's a journey, not a destination.
It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
It requires that constant effort, that mindful attention, and the willingness to adapt and evolve as you go.
But the rewards, they're so worth the investment. A strong company culture, it attracts top talent for sure, but it also unlocks that innovative potential that exists within every organization.
And that's what it's all about, right?
It is. It's about giving your team the tools and the environment they need to turn their ideas into reality.
Beautifully said. This has been a really insightful deep dive into the world of company culture. But before we wrap up completely, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Oh, I like that. A little food for thought.
Yes, exactly. So, what one thing could you do differently tomorrow to cultivate a more innovative environment within your company? Think about it. Could you encourage more open dialogue? Maybe celebrate a small win more publicly? Or even just empower your team to take a calculated risk?
Yeah, sometimes those small changes, they can create a ripple effect, They can lead to a much more dynamic and innovative workplace.
And speaking of tools and resources,
Yeah.
the IdeaScale blog post, it doesn't just talk about the why of company culture.
Yeah.
It also gives us some concrete how-tos. And they actually offer a way to kickstart that innovation engine, right?
They do.
Or-
Through their platform, they have this great call to action, ignite innovation with your IdeaScale community. It's all about tapping into the collective brain power of your team.
I love that. It's not just about building a better culture and then crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. It's about giving you the tools and the framework to capture those great ideas, refine them, and actually implement them.
It's about making innovation happen. It's like they're giving you all the ingredients you need to create this thriving innovation garden.
Exactly. And even with the best of intentions, those brilliant ideas can get lost in the day-to-day if you don't have a system in place to capture and nurture them.
That's where a platform like IdeaScale can really make a difference. It provides that structure and the support to turn those initial sparks into actual actionable plans.
And I imagine it also helps to create a sense of ownership and engagement among employees. When people feel like their ideas are being heard, like they have a chance to make a real impact, they're going to be much more invested in the company's success.
Absolutely. It creates this really cool cycle. A strong culture leads to more innovation, which in turn just strengthens that culture even further.
It's like this upward spiral of positive change.
Exactly. So to wrap up our deep dive today, what would you say is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
I think the biggest takeaway is that building a strong company culture, it's not just about creating a happy workplace. It's about unleashing that innovative potential that exists within every organization.
Right. And then using that potential to actually drive meaningful results.
Exactly. So for our listeners who are ready to turn their work teams into innovators, IdeaScale offers a free trial. You can just head over to ideascale.com and book a demo.
It's a great way to get a feel for the platform, to see how it can help you cultivate that culture of innovation within your own organization.
It's a great first step. Well, that brings us to the end of another deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll be back soon with more insights and inspiration to help you navigate this amazing world of innovation.